and welcome back to Learn Synthesis with VCV Rack. I'm your host, Dr. Lawrence W. Moore. And in this episode, episode 2 of series 1, we are going to go further with the fundamentals of synthesis. We're going to be learning more about the VCO. We're going to be learning about the LFO. And we're going to be learning more about the VCA and the ADSR envelope generator. All these are basics of synthesis, and these are terms you need to know if you're going to know what things do in any software that you use. Although VCV Rack, what we're using right now, is a free download, and I've been exploring it even further, and basically for free you have a whole bunch of modules that you can add to it. You can use it with a DAW and stuff like that. So what they put out there for free for you to use is really expansive. It's really worth your time downloading the software and trying it out. And stick with me to learn how to use it. So let's keep on going. Okay, so here is the patch that we made last time. Basic MIDI in, using a VCO then to generate our initial sound. It has 4 basic waveforms that it can produce. I think in the next episode I'll go into more depth about these 4 different wave shapes and their multiple uses and the different sound types that you can create with them. And then we have that governed by an envelope generator here. So it gives the amplitude of the sound shape, a certain speed of attack, a sustain level, and then a speed of release. And then this is the VCA that you need to employ the envelope generator on the sound. So what I am going to do is I am going to clear the cables here. I'm going to go up to Edit, and you can clear cables and leave your modules in place. That's if you click on it. So anyway, the reason why I want to do this is last time I was ending it up trying to work with velocity to get more expressiveness in the sound. I think a great way of doing things is for me to show you that I've succeeded in finding out how to do that. And I am going to show you that while kind of like reviewing a little bit. Although if you're watching this series and you just came upon this video, seeing episode 1 will be very useful to you. I kind of show you around the software a bit and everything, and it's really worth watching. Okay, so here we go again. VCO, this is generating our signal. And you have 4 basic wave shapes that you can generate. If you want to trigger it with MIDI, you need to hook that up. The MIDI to CV module, we right-click in space on the rack and type into the search bar in the upper left-hand corner. We type MIDI, M-I-D-I. This is it right here, MIDI to CV. This is the module that gives you basically your MIDI notes, your velocity, and the gate for which is really controlling note on and off. And that's what you want to start with. You do have the option of selecting whether you want to use a computer keyboard. If you're using Linux, you'll want to use ALSA or Jack. If you're using Windows, you want to select Microsoft MIDI. I'm not sure what it is in Mac, but there will be a comparable option for your operating system, which basically governs all your MIDI devices. The second option is selecting the MIDI device that you're using. Since we have it on, I have it on ALSA, it would be the launch key. And so that's what I have selected. And then you can control what channel it receives on. At this point, I just have it set on all channels. That way I don't need to worry about what channel my keyboard is set to transmit on, although it's probably 1. Later on, we'll show you how to hook this up to a DAW and using like virtual MIDI connections. And in doing that, you would probably be able to put in, well, not probably, you would be able to put in multiple sounds that you make and have them all set on different MIDI channels so that you could have all your sounds in one rack. And, you'd need to zoom out for that, but, you could put all your sounds in there and have them on separate channels. Okay, so anyway, there's our review of MIDI to CV. So here, our pitch is controlled by volts per octave. That is terminology from the analog world. That's basically where voltage controls what pitch is being generated, as the voltage does control this oscillator, hence the term voltage-controlled oscillator. So we hook that up there. The gate, well, before I get to that, the output of this oscillator, depending on what wave shape you want, let's say a sawtooth. You want a buzzy sawtooth sound. That would actually go to the input of the VCA over here, and then the envelope generator would govern it. But I want to actually have velocity have a little more governance over this. So I'm holding down Shift and I'm clicking these modules. I'm going to drag them over a little bit. And then I'm going to right click here. I'm going to type VCA and put in a second VCA. This is last time where I was trying to get VCA. Yeah, you need the A to really get the right selection of modules. This is where last time I was trying to get a little bit more expressiveness with the velocity, but I did some thinking and figured it out. If we hook velocity up here to control this VCA, basically what we're saying is the quickness and the strength at which you hit the key. Basically, velocity means quickness of hitting the key. The faster you hit it, usually that's the harder you hit it. And so it should sound a little louder, shouldn't it, than when you hit it slow and soft. So now we're going to have that control the amplitude of this oscillator, which directly affects its loudness. So we take the sawtooth out and put it in here for the audio input of this VCA. Our velocity is controlling its amplitude. Now this isn't going to sound exactly right at first, but it'll allow me to explain something. We'll hook it up here. Let me turn that down a bit. Now, when I hit a key soft, it's quieter. When I hit a key hard, it's louder. But let's turn that off so I can talk. So yeah, we are getting velocity to control the amplitude. Now we want to do that before we get to the envelope, because in the envelope there's no input to control the level of your attack or the peak amplitude that it rises to at the beginning of playing a note. The only input you have is for the gate here, which turns the note on, which turns, well, it's the signal of note on, and it basically turns the envelope on so the shape begins. And so you have the speed of your attack that you can set here. And then you have the speed of the decay down to your sustain level, which we're actually going to turn up from a little bit from where I had it. And then you have your release time so that when you release the key, how quickly does the note go away? Okay, so that gets executed by whether the note has been pressed and when it's been released. All these three factors. Your sustain is level, but the other three, attack, decay, and release, are time of how long those shapes last, how long they stretch out for. So our velocity is governing our ultimate amplitude, so our attack level is going to be controlled by that now. So we have control of how high it rises to in the attack. And so we basically have the output of this VCA carrying audio to the audio input of this VCA. And then we want the control of this envelope generator that's being triggered by the gate to control the VCA over here to give it more of a shape. You see, this is on all the way because right now, the last note I played was really strong. That's still sounding and going through here. But it's going into this VCA where the envelope is controlling it, and right here, the envelope has it off because the note hasn't been played yet. And then we'll take the audio output of this VCA and put it in the input over here. Disconnect this cable first. There we go. There we are. Now we can hear it. Here's a soft key. That's really soft because I left the volume down. Go there. That's also sounding too soft. Something's wrong. Mission control. Oh, this audio cable isn't hooked up. The output from this VCA, where velocity is governing it, goes into this VCA where the envelope further governs it and controls its level. That was a fairly soft hit. Here's a harder one. There you go. You got difference. All right, so now we are using this VCA so that velocity has an impact on the attack level here. Let's also have our velocity control the speed of the attack. Now remember from last time, whenever something's already hooked up, you go to the destination or the input over here for attack time, and we can drag that over here to velocity even though it's already hooked up. Now it's hooked up, and now our velocity is going two places. It's controlling the amplitude at this point before it gets to the envelope, so the amplitude of our attack is being controlled, and now we're going to control with velocity the speed of our attack. We discovered last time that from the 12 o'clock position, if you go left, it's kind of like an inverse or reduction, and to the right, it's an increase. Since attack time is time, if we turn this to the right, the harder we hit the key or the higher the velocity with which we hit it, the longer the attack will be because time will increase. We don't really want that because typically when you hit a key fast and hard, you want a quick response. And so we need to turn that left of the 12 o'clock position to get a shorter attack time. And thus, softer attacks or lower velocities will result in longer times. And so let's try with this setting. That's soft, that's hard. Yeah, now we're hearing far more expressiveness. I'm going to move this closer to the 12 o'clock position to see what we get there. If we move it further from the 12 o'clock position, we'll get more of a differentiation. And actually, I like that. That's better. But if we move it too far down, if you hit the key soft, oh. Actually, that's not bad at all. I was thinking there's a point where you have it too low, that's too slow of an attack. But actually, all those just got better and better. So anyway, there, I think, there we go. We got a much more expressive sounding instrument than we had last time. Of course, it's being monophonic. If you press another key before releasing the first key, it does not on its own re-trigger this envelope. We'll look at things like that a little bit later, but in this episode, I want to focus more on our oscillators. And in fact, we're going to look a little bit more at the VCO. I didn't point this out last time, but a cool thing is you can right-click on the VCO's dial, and you can actually input a frequency level. So if you're not using MIDI, you're using this without MIDI control, generating sounds, maybe using a step sequence or other things, and you just want to set a frequency for your oscillators, you can set values for your dials. And look, it even works for pulse width. And what about volume? If you want to make it exactly 0.0 dB, you got it. And that's what I would recommend. Not amplifying it beyond 0 dB. You just want to be 0 dB and below, usually. It gives you the space to do that, I guess, if you want to distort and so forth. So anyway, what else? Yeah, the VCO has our 4 basic wave shapes, which will be the topic of the next episode, exploring them in more detail. But your VCO is your oscillator that controls, or generates, I should say, generates sound. There is another oscillator that we should learn at this point. I'm going to zoom out. And we're going to right click. And we're going to put in an LFO. And we're going to use this one right here. Now, LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. And what an LFO is going to do is it's not really going to produce sound. A lot of times it doesn't produce sound that you hear, or sometimes it'll produce some low frequencies that you hear, but it's not normally used for that. It's used more to control things. And it gives you basically frequencies that are really low, or shall we say at a slow rate of oscillation, that can be useful for control parameters. But for fun, we are going to see how high and how low this LFO goes. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit and use the arrow keys to move around. I'm going to disconnect the audio cable here temporarily and hook our LFO up to it. Let's just take a sine wave from it. Roll up, plug it in. Okay, and at this point, we're not hearing anything yet, but we turn up the dial. Now that's loud, and I'm sure if it's loud for me, it's probably loud for you. So I'm going to turn the volume here down. But as you saw, or as you heard, we got frequencies there. So let's right click on this. Now I'm going to zoom in to read this. When I zoom in, you're going to see a second mouse cursor appear. The large mouse cursor is actually me. The other one is effect of this magnifier, but when you zoom in with the controls in VCV Rack, it zooms in on modules in the GUI, but it does not enlarge the menus. So that's why in order to see this, I had to zoom in. So we are currently at 2.31 hertz, something like that. A lot of times there's plenty of numbers after the decimal point for this oscillator. You're not going to hear that. The lowest frequency we can ideally hear is 20 hertz if your speakers or headphones carry that. But usually you got to get up into the 30s before you really hear it, and then it's like subwoofer material. So the highest frequency here is actually pretty high. 1024 hertz. That's pretty high for an LFO. Now the lowest frequency we can get out of it, which of course we have no chance of hearing, is 0.039, 0.0039. So that is 0.003 of a hertz. So that's pretty slow. So in any case, like I said, this is mostly used for controlling things. So let's do some of that. So I'm going to disconnect it from audio here and hook this back up. So what can we control with this? Well, let me get back to normal zoom there so we don't have a second mouse cursor. I'm going to plug in another module here. One thing we can control is amplitude. By adding another VCA. So I'm going to right click here, type in VCA into search, get the right letters, works out better that way. Select the VCA, there we go. Now, shouldn't zoom in that way, zoom in this way. There we go. Arrow up. There, I'm getting used to the zoom controls, but they are quite useful. And they are quite flexible. I like them. So we need to go into this first for it to affect our sound. So our sawtooth is going to go into here, into this VCA where we're going to control its amplitude modulation. Basically, we're going to control, using the LFO, the amplitude of this oscillator. And then after that happens, it can go here where velocity once again will control it. And then, of course, further on down the line. So now, for the control input of this new VCA for amplitude modulation, we're going to take the sine out from here. And we already see the LFO is oscillating this. We're not hearing it because here's where velocity controls the amplitude over here. And this is after this. So this signal goes into here. So this signal's been reduced to this much, but the envelope's not on. So here, this is where the final amplitude control is. And that's what's going into our audio output. And so we need to basically play a note. And we are getting amplitude modulation. Now, when it's that slow, I could turn this up a little bit now. It's basically what we call tremolo. And I believe this is at something like 2 hertz, 2 cycles per second. So we hear 2 fluctuations per second. Okay, now if we turn this up in frequency and it gets fast enough, we no longer hear the individual fluctuations. We start entering the realm of what's called ring modulation. When it's slow enough that you hear the individual fluctuations, usually 20 hertz and below, it's called tremolo. All of them are called amplitude modulation, but tremolo is when it's slow enough of an amplitude modulation for you to hear the individual fluctuations. When it gets fast enough, they start blurring together and start creating this effect called sidebands, and then it becomes ring modulation, which is more of a timbral effect. As you play different notes, however, it's going to sound a little bit different. We're going to talk about frequency modulation and amplitude modulation in more detail in later lessons. But right now, we're seeing what this low frequency oscillator can do. Now, is there any way to govern its frequency a little bit so it's not just, set the dial and it's just going to be that much? There's plenty of ways of doing it, but one way we're already kind of familiar with is using an envelope. And we're going to right click here. We'll type in EG because an ADSR envelope is a type of envelope generator. And then let's zoom in. Okay, so this gives us a shape, and this shape can be used in multiple ways. we've already been using it to control the overall amplitude or shape over time in the amplitude of our sound, which gives us the possibility of having an attack time to a peak, a decay fall to a sustain level, and then a release when you release the key, going to no sound or zero. Now we're going to use it to control the frequency of this oscillator. And we can do that by plugging it into the frequency modulation, this FM input on the module itself. Basically, frequency modulation is modulating frequency. We're changing it over time. And so we just take our output here, put it to the FM in here to change the frequency of our LFO. But envelopes, especially this ADSR, needs to be triggered to tell it to start working and stop working. That's how it functions. And so we need to put gate into its gate input here in order to get something to happen. So let's go from the gate. Well, since gate's already hooked up, remember, we got to go from the destination to the source here, and it'll allow you to hook it up. Didn't quite happen there. That was probably my fault. Let me get this right. There we go. So now, when I press a key, this envelope will also be triggered in addition to this. This is the overall sound. This is going to be the frequency of our oscillation. And at first, we're not going to hear anything because I didn't adjust this dial. But I'm going to adjust this dial while holding down the note. Turning it to the right of 12 o'clock means increase. So basically, this will rise to an increase and then go to a sustain level. To make things a little bit easier to perceive, let's get rid of sustain and release. So all we have is an attack and a decay controlled by our attack time and decay times here, sliders. So what we should hear now is a rise in speed or rate of that amplitude modulation, fluctuations that you hear, and then a decrease in their speed over the decay portion of the envelope. And we certainly heard that. Let's make it a little bit longer of an increase. Okay, so that was a pretty long one. Let me kind of make it. Whoa! I just dragged the whole module. All right. Let's reduce that a bit. And of course, the way you adjust the main frequency here will kind of like change your range of speeds. There we go. So I think you get the overall concept. We're using this shape to govern the speed of this low frequency oscillator that's controlling the amplitude of our sound before it gets further shaped. You know, if I release too early, the sound gets shut off either way because this envelope generator is further along the signal path than this one. This one affects it first, but this one affects it second, and it's kind of like controlling that. So, in any case, we can use LFOs for other things. Like, how about the frequency of our main oscillator? In this case, it would be called our carrier oscillator. So let's make another LFO. And we're going to take its sine output, and we're going to put it in the FM input on our VCO. So now the frequency or the pitch that this plays is being oscillated. So we should hear it rise and fall in pitch. Now I am going to slow this one. To be honest with you, I'm going to disconnect this one so we don't have the sound of the amplitude modulation interfering with what we're hearing. We're hearing nothing yet because we didn't adjust the dial here, saying in what way and what amount is this LFO going to be changing our frequency here, which is really being governed by the note we play on the keyboard. But we can have it modulated by turning this up. And so you can get a bit of a vibrato. Now, if you go to the left of 12 o'clock, it bends down. So in the way this works, this sine wave, even though when you normally see a sine wave, there's a crest above the center line and a trough below it, it seems to be it uses it as something that fluctuates above or below based on where this position is. So that's a good thing to keep in mind, which is actually pretty good because when you're doing this sort of modulation here, it's especially good for amplitude modulation because then you don't want to go below zero really, otherwise you sense really like it wraps around and you sense 2 cycles in the place of 1 because of the crest and the trough of the waveform being perceived as 2 fluctuations instead of 1. But in any case, I digress. And we could do the same thing with this in adding an envelope to it. Let's search for an EG. Going to use our same, zoom out again. I'm so comfortable with zooming in using the operating system's zoom function that, it's probably annoying in these videos because then it creates a second mouse cursor, which you don't need to see. All right, so let's control in the same way we did before the frequency of this LFO. So this will allow us to control the rate of our vibrato, basically. And we need the gate once again. Yep, go from destination to source. And our gate can control this envelope as well. Now, if you have a quick enough attack time, you're not going to hear much. So in order to hear this well, I'm going to make it just an attack and decay once again, which really ends up being more of like an attack and a release. But these are just time. It has nothing to do with you releasing the key, so really it is an attack and decay. So we should hear the vibrato slowly speed up and then slow down. Of course, that depends on how this is positioned. It's just a little bit right of midnight, so here we go. Okay. Let me check something here. The output of the envelope generator is going in here. And the output of this is going into FM here. All right. Yeah, no, this is going in here. This knob needs to be adjusted for us to hear a change in speed. So we're turning it a little to the right because we want it to increase in speed over the beginning of this envelope, the attack, and then decrease in speed over the decay time. And it did just that. Let's increase this a little bit so it gets faster. Now, with other envelope shapes, which you can achieve with other modules, you could have like an attack and maybe a hold and then a decay. And so it would hold or maybe sustain at a certain rate. We do have a sustain here, so we might just be able to do that. Let's turn down our decay time. Remember, this is what it's going to sustain at while the note is being held. So we want a slow increase in vibrato. We want it to hold. And then, yeah, over the release time, it can slow down a bit. But this sustain, it may just look like a little point here, but really this will last as long as you're holding the key. So we have a long, slow attack, sustain, and then when you release the key, it'll start slowing down again. Now, if we make this longer, it'll be a slower fall off in, what do you call it, the rate of the vibrato. But remember, this governs the overall sound, so we need a long enough release here for us to be able to even hear that. Otherwise, it'll cut off too soon before we hear it. Because both of these, like all three of these envelope generators, are being controlled by the gate over here, as far as when they start and when they stop. There, when I release the key, it slows down as it decays. Now, as you play with these different parameters, you can get things closer to what you really would like to have. I'm going to make it longer. So let's make the attack here quicker, meaning the speed at which it rises to our vibrato rate. All right. So anyway, just to make this sound real funky, let's put our amplitude modulation back in. Now that I've explained that concept, and that means taking one of these wave shapes out here. Hey, let's try a square wave shape. This should sound more like an on-off modulation in the amplitude. And this is going into the control of the VCA here. All right, let's zoom out just a little. There we go. Okay, let's see if we can play with this a bit more. Let's make this a little bit. Our sustain level we're going to turn up here now, so it does sustain at a certain rate of tremolo. And we'll have a release as well. Let's see how that sounds. It's kind of cool when you just like press the key and release. Okay, so that's the power of Eurorack and Eurorack modeling systems like VCV Rack, is you can make some things that are totally outside of the box and do some really crazy stuff. Like if I jack up the attack time on all these, let's see what that gives us. All right, but let's make the speed of these different oscillators higher. So now it'll get to the point where both the amplitude and the frequency modulation are going to get into that rate where they create sidebands. Let me turn this one down. All right, you could get some really cool stuff here. So anyway, I hope you understand now the concepts of the VCO versus the LFO and multiple ways in which you can use envelope generators. Next time, we're going to be looking at how the differences between the four basic wave shapes, so you understand those concepts, and different uses of them, and some sound types that you can create with these different four basic wave shapes. And we'll go into filtering a little bit because you're kind of limited into the sounds that you can create until you actually carve them up a little bit and shape their frequency spectrum. So that will be coming next time. I am going to find just the right zoom here for taking a snapshot of this for the thumbnail. And yeah, let's see here. I'm trying to get it right in view. But in any case, until next time, I just, anybody, if you enjoyed this content at all or you've learned from it, please do hit the like button. It helps me out a lot. Subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be continuing this series for a while, and you'll see when new episodes come up. And yeah, I'm having fun with this, so I'm going to, there's going to be multiple series on this, like multiple seasons and everything. Leave a comment if you have questions or you have some ideas you'd like me to expand into, or just to say hello. All that helps the reach of these videos, so I appreciate it very much. Anything you can do, share on social media, help this series grow. Thank you very much. Until next time, take care and stay free. I got my snapshot.